Welcome to my channel. My name is Josh Christian, and today I'm making a video addressing what is probably the most common comment or question that I get on my channel, which is, if I'm an outsider or a beginner, how do I break into the tech industry? What are the exact steps that I need to take in a specific order in order to establish myself as a real developer and get a job in this industry? Let's get started. So first off, I want to address all the people that are down in my comments saying tech is dead. So often I get the comment or some version of a comment that says something along the lines of, well, is this industry really worth even getting into anymore? Because it seems like everybody around me is saying it's dead. Everybody's getting replaced by AI, the market's oversaturated, is it really worth it anymore? And my answer to that would be, it depends on your personality, it depends on who you are as a person. If you are the type of person that wants to work hard and learn and educate yourself about your topic, you're going to be fine. You're not going to have any problems. You're going to be able to break into the industry. As long as you educate yourself and work hard, you're going to be able to make it. So I don't think this is so much a problem of, is the industry available anymore? Plus, when we look at the job market, there are more tech jobs available now, as we speak, than ever before in human history. It's not like there's a shortage of tech jobs. It's just that there are too many people trying to get those jobs. And it's not uncommon, especially in really populated cities like Miami and San Francisco, to see over 1,000 people apply to one job. In fact, go on LinkedIn and start applying, you'll see it everywhere. So this is a real problem for people. The oversaturation of the market is definitely going to make it way harder to get a job. I'm not gonna lie to you and say it's gonna be easy. It's not gonna be easy. But if you're willing to work hard, it is absolutely still worth it, and there's definitely still money in being a programmer and working in tech. Some people point fingers to the educational hierarchy for causing this problem, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. If we look back only about 10 years ago, everybody in middle school was being told in one way or another that they're too good to do blue-collar work. When I was in high school, I heard a lot of people, especially teachers, a big emphasis from teachers, that you need to go into white-collar work. You need to become a programmer or a doctor or somebody that works an office job, because if you go into blue-collar work, you're going to be poor and miserable. And the emphasis on that is ironic, because the exact opposite ended up happening. Now, office jobs are seemingly what are making people miserable. And when we look at the blue-collar industry, people are making a lot more money in that now, and that's, of course, a result of it being undersaturated. So many people went into white-collar jobs that it left basically nobody for the blue-collar jobs, but those still need to get done. In fact, those need to get done in much greater numbers many times than the white-collar jobs. Everybody I knew when I was going to school thought that they were too good for blue-collar work, and that mindset definitely resulted in an imbalance in a lot of industries, even way beyond just tech. So now I'm going to get into the steps that worked for me in my career. Now, these steps aren't going to be the exact same for every different position, for every different person. Different people learn different ways too, so I can't recommend the same thing to every single person. With all that said, the steps that I'm about to show you are going to work for most people. Now, this video is catered to beginners or people that are coming into the industry, maybe out of college or out of high school. Maybe it's time for you to rethink your career, or maybe you want to move into a different position in a different field, or very possibly you were laid off in the recent layoffs. This video is going to be relevant to a lot of people in that position as well. So the first topic we have to really start with is education. Now, maybe you're watching this and you already just got out of college. You just spent 4 years getting your bachelor's degree. You did all the maths, you did all the programming. If that's you, you're in a good place. Now you don't have to worry so much about people looking down upon you for not having gone to college, which it does happen in any industry, although it happens less in tech than most. And if that's you, you can just skip this section and go straight to building your portfolio. There are a lot of different options in today's world for education. Of course, there's college. If you want, you can go to college. You may very well appreciate that. A lot of people learn well when they have people holding them accountable. So if you're the type of person that can't do things on your own, or you feel stressed out when you're trying to work on your own, maybe college is for you. Maybe you do need to go to college. My recommendation for those considering it would be to consider cheaper colleges. Start at a community college. Knock out all of your base credits early, and then if you decide you want to specialize at a really nice college, you can finish up your last 2 years and get your bachelor at a nicer college. That'll save you a lot of money. I think there's too many people that have this idea that you have to go to a 4-year college right away. And if you don't, you're not going to have the same prestige that the industry wants you to have. And that's just not true at all. I have done hundreds of interviews in tech, and I have only been asked where I went to college maybe a couple times ever. I don't think college almost ever even comes up. For the most part, interviewers just ask about my experience in education kind of as an open-ended question and allow me to explain it to them. So I don't think it's been a stumbling block, at least for me. Now, it does look good on a resume to say you have a bachelor's degree, but again, I don't think it's necessary. So what are the other options outside of college that you have if you want to get an education? Well, there's boot camps. Now, a lot of people say a lot of negative things about boot camps, and some of those are justified, but I will say, I have friends who have gone through the boot camp system, and the majority of them have gotten jobs pretty quickly out of their boot camp. I can't say I know anybody that went to these boot camps and couldn't get a job after. And the ones that couldn't get a job really quickly seem to still get jobs as long as they applied to enough places. So again, I can't speak for everybody, but I have seen results from the boot camps. With that said, most of these boot camps are only like 6 weeks long, so they on their own are probably not going to be enough for a lot of high-level jobs outside of just junior positions for most people. So you might seriously want to consider reading a lot of books and starting a lot of online programs, maybe even looking into some micro degrees that Udacity has, and I think Team Treehouse has something along those lines now. There's also websites that offer training like Udemy, there's Udacity, as I mentioned, there's Lynda, which is now LinkedIn Learning, there's Pluralsight, which has a lot of great videos on programming. I found that they have a tutorial on almost every subject, so that's certainly one place to start if you're interested in that. Another question that I get, especially from friends and family very often, is how much math is really necessary to be a programmer? Now, I could make dozens of videos on this topic, covering many hours of content, but to summarize, the answer is it depends on you. It depends exactly on the subfield that you're in. It depends on the app you're making. It depends on the employer you're working for. But I have found in my programming experience and all the different algorithms and apps and things I've worked on, almost always, I would say well over 95% of the time, I'm just using basic algebra and arithmetic. So if you understand basic arithmetic, if you have a high school level understanding of that, and maybe some pre-algebra, I don't think you even need advanced algebra. Even just pre-algebra is enough. And the reason why I say that is because when we look at programming, programming itself is a math. It's an applied mathematics. You can't learn programming without knowing math. It's a contradiction because programming is math. And in a way, although it's not discrete mathematics, you could argue that through programming, you learn math. When I very first got into programming, I knew math, but I didn't know calculus. And I became a good programmer, I would say, just from working on a wide variety of apps. And there came a point when I decided I wanted to learn calculus. So I bought a book called Calculus 1 for Dummies. And as I went through the book, I was shocked at how much I already understood. I thought I didn't know any calculus. And here I am picking up a book on it going, oh, I've done that in programming. So programming actually helped me improve my math skills significantly. If you're working on generic iOS apps and you're making basic video games, any type of normal standardized app, you are probably going to be using math, but not in any significant manner outside of just algebra. So my advice to most people when it comes to math would be to pick up one of two books. You could go Algebra for Dummies, which is an excellent jump-starting book into algebra if you don't already know it or you didn't take it in high school. And All the Math You'll Ever Need, another excellent book just to kind of knock out all the high notes of mathematics that you'll use in your career. Now, of course, there will be exceptions. If you're building game engines, or if you're doing physics simulations, or in my case, I built this very unique and interesting algorithm called VAF, which is visual audio format. And it basically takes a waveform in an audio file, and it converts it into a vector. Now, the nature of vectors is actually kind of complicated, especially when you're mapping out vectors over time. So I ended up having to use a lot of calculus for that particular app. And you will run into situations like that if you're doing advanced programming. But in my experience, most of my friends don't. And most of the people working at Facebook and just doing regular programming jobs for FANG companies probably will not use heavy engineering math most of the time. Now, when it comes to books, I am the type of guy who likes to read a lot. I would say probably the huge majority of what I've learned has not been from school or videos or courses, but it's just been from reading books. And I know there's a lot of people that don't necessarily learn that way. So if you're the type that needs to have your hand held or you just want to be pushed by a professor, maybe this isn't the best way to learn on your own. But if you're like me and you're a self-starter that just wants to kind of do everything on their own, definitely start with books. Books are awesome. It's the best way to learn. So let me get started on some book recommendations. I have read hundreds and hundreds of programming books and have a huge library of it, but these are kind of the few handful of books that I really remember as distinctly being the best books in my arsenal, the ones that really helped me develop my mind as a programmer. So one of the books that I really enjoyed reading when I first got into development, The C# Player's Guide by R.B. Whitaker. The reason why I like this book so much is because of all of the books I've ever read on programming, I feel as though this particular writer summarizes every different element so perfectly. Sometimes I'll read a book written by college professors or people that are extremely advanced, and they suffer from the reverse Dunning-Kruger's effect. What ends up happening is after just a few chapters, the first few are easy to understand and well written, and it just balloons into these extremely complex topics, and they don't do a good job of explaining things for beginners. This book is not like that. This is one of the best books on programming that has ever been written, in my opinion. It is just so clear and concise all the way through. Even if you're a beginner or a child, you're not going to struggle to read this book, which is why this is my primary recommended book. Now, some people might say, okay, but I don't want to learn C#. C# is not the language I want to go into. And that's okay. You know what? If you learn C#, this knowledge is going to be applicable to every other language you learn outside of maybe Python. But if that's you and you don't want to learn C#, I have another excellent recommendation next. And that leads to my next book, which is C Programming for Absolute Beginners. And this is written by Greg Perry and Dean Miller. So this is for standard C. Now, I recommend this book for two reasons. The first is because it's C. If you don't know, C is the mother of all languages, so when you learn C, you are effectively learning every other language. Literally, you could pick up this book, learn C, at least the basics of it. It's not the thickest, biggest book, but it does give you the basic understanding of programming. And from this book, you could kickstart your education into any other language. You will easily be able to understand Python, C#, Java, whatever else from this language, because every language that there is takes heavy influence from C. The other reason I recommend this book is because it's very clear and concise in its explanations. I think this is an excellent book for children, for beginners, for people fresh out of college who want to learn something in more detail, maybe if they didn't get enough while they were in school. I don't think anybody is really going to struggle to read this book, even if you're not the smartest person in the world or you're coming from a background of lesser education. Once you read a vanilla programming language book, in other words, just a book like what I showed, something about C or C#, and learn the basic syntax of how programming works, then I recommend abstracting that out into books more about computer science as a whole. So a couple books that I really enjoy a lot would be, it's upside down, Computer Science Distilled. Now this is written by Waldston Ferreira Philo. I don't know how that's pronounced. But this is just a really short, easy to read book. I think all the code examples are in Python. So you may not want to read this book or get into it until you've taken a quick little course or overview on Python. It won't take you very long. Python's very easy, especially if you're coming from C# or C, you're gonna have very little problem picking up Python very, very quickly, just so you know what you're reading while you read these books. This is a very fast and quick couple hundred page or less, I think actually. Yeah, 150 page book on just the generics of computer science. This is a book I've read multiple times. I really appreciate it because it does such a good job of condensing a huge topic into just a tiny sort of refresher. And if you're new to computer science, you may not necessarily need to know everything there is to know about the field. You might just want a quick book that will give you an overview, and this is definitely the one. And then the second book I want to get into really quickly is Grokking Algorithms. This is another book that's done in Python. All the examples are in Python, which again is fine. Python's easy to read. It's designed to be easy to read and teach, especially for scientific purposes. So if you want to kind of abstract your view out from programming in a vanilla language, I do recommend Python as just kind of a first starter when you're getting into these books. I would not recommend either of these books until you learn a language though, whether that be Python or C or C#, because it doesn't make sense to learn the outside perspective of what you're going to be doing with programming until you at least understand the foundations of it. So a lot of people jump into these books first and kind of struggle with them. They say, I don't understand the purpose of learning algorithms because I'm not using them in any functional way. And you won't understand, of course, any of the programming examples in it either. So my advice would be learn a vanilla language first, pick up a good book like what the ones I recommended on that, and then we move outwards into the more architectural books. Once you feel you have a really good understanding of your language, then you can pick up the big technical books and really get into the nitty-gritty details of your language. So for me, because I'm a C programmer, my favorite book is this one. It's called C Primer Plus. Now this book is written by Stephen Prada. Stephen Prada, I believe, is a professor of astronomy, I think. So he's a brilliant guy. And sometimes you suffer from that when you're in the book. As you can see, it's not a short book. Let's see, it is 1,000 pages long. So it's basically going to be your programmer's Bible if you're a C programmer. I believe this same company, which is Addison Wesley, makes the same format of book for most languages. But these books are so in-depth. If you were to read through this entire book, you would know literally everything there is to know about C within reason. And I have read this book. I've read it a couple times, actually. And this is my favorite because I love the nitty-gritty dry details. Again, not every person's like me. Not everyone can pick up a 1,000-page book and read the whole thing from cover to cover. But if you're the type of person that is like me and you like all that detail and nuance, this is definitely the book or the book series for you. It can sometimes seem counterintuitive to have to learn a specialization before you move your way upwards and learn the more generic, abstract concepts of architecture. But that is the right way to learn, and it's the way colleges teach. I just think they spend too much time on the specialization. My problem, I guess, with the way colleges teach is that they start at that specialized bottom of the triangle, and you spend almost 2 years there, and then they just very quickly overview the rest of the triangle, which I just don't think is a good way to teach. I think it's good to start there. Immediately, as soon as people understand how programming works, broaden the horizon, go into basically what is the full computer science degree, then move back down into a specialization as it makes more sense. Software development is just one of those really weird fields where there isn't a super linear way to learn it. You kind of have to bounce around a little bit because as you learn one thing, then you can understand other things better. So you just have to anticipate on that. Don't expect to just read one book and be an expert. Don't expect to just go to bootcamp and become an expert. And don't even expect to go to college and become an expert, especially once you start programming for a company and they're demanding high standards of you. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is certifications. I have heard strong arguments that certifications are kind of worthless. However, in my personal career, I actually found them to be really useful. A lot of jobs actually require you to have CompTIA certifications anyways, especially in IT. So I don't think it's worthless at all. I think it just depends on who you are, on the exact type of job you're working in and who you're working for. But in most cases, it does add something to your resume, especially if you didn't go to college and you don't have collegiate experience and you can't say you have a 4-year bachelor's degree. The next best thing is going to be certifications. Now, the standard company for providing certifications is CompTIA. I think CompTIA has maybe 5 or 6 certifications specifically for software developers. The thing about CompTIA is you do have to test in person, so you have to be prepared for an actual in-person test. Where I live, they do the tests at my local DMV. Microsoft is another company that offers a huge amount of certifications. I personally have a C# app development certification from Microsoft, and it's definitely one of the best certifications I've ever gotten. I also find that Microsoft's education they provide for their certifications is super good. It's some of the best out there, so I definitely recommend that you look into that. If you're looking into the game industry, even Unity has a bunch of different certifications to use their engine. I think Unreal Engine has a few as well. So you're going to be able to find certifications in basically any industry that you're in. I know iOS has a bunch if you want to be an iOS developer. Android has some if you want to develop apps for Android. So you're not going to have problems finding certifications, but I do recommend adding them to your repertoire. The next big thing you need to focus on is your portfolio. This is arguably one of the most important parts of getting a job in tech. The most important thing is not what you've worked on, but it's what you've finished and can actually show for yourself. Companies are going to look at your experience more than they're going to look at anything else on your resume, especially when we talk about the pragmatics of working for, say, a small company. A small company like a startup is not going to hire you unless they know that you have experience. They can't take a risk on you. Big FANG companies might. They do have good training programs. If they see a good personality there, they may hire you just based on who you are as a person. But small startups and smaller companies and medium-sized companies are definitely not going to hire you unless you absolutely have something to show for yourself already. So this is where building a portfolio is so important. Generally in the tech industry, people are going to ask you for your GitHub link. And if you don't already know what GitHub is, it's basically a place where you can put up repositories of the things you've worked on, as well as work on other people's projects. So my advice is you start working on your own stuff first. So come up with some app ideas, come up with game ideas, anything that you can make relatively quickly. Just come up with the idea, make it and finish it, and upload it to your public repository. Make sure that you give a link to your GitHub when you're applying for jobs, and I'd recommend even putting one in your resume. One of the best ways to stand out when you're doing interviews is not just to talk about the things you made yourself, but the things you made with other people. And this is where GitHub is so essential to your future career. My advice to everybody is after you build your own things, after you understand how programming works, after you figure out how GitHub works and uploading things works, learn how to fork projects, as well as putting a really big emphasis on working on projects collectively with other people. A good example of these open source projects would be Blender. Now there's hundreds, if not many thousands of different projects you could work on. Blender's probably not the best for somebody who's a beginner, but it's just an example I'm using. Blender is one of the greatest open source projects that has ever existed. And if you were somebody that got their code pulled into the master branch, that alone is huge for your experience. Because now when you're in your interviews, you can actually talk about the things you've worked on with other people. And this is important. Working on other projects is going to be very valuable to a lot of companies because companies don't want to just know that you're a good programmer. They want to know that you have the skill of being able to read and interpret other people's code. That is a totally separate skill from being a good programmer on its own. I've actually known quite a few good programmers, including myself at one point, who had never worked on other people's projects before. And as soon as I started working on other people's code, I realized interpreting and reading other people's code is just this massive skill set on its own because you don't know how they got to the conclusions they got to. You don't know when you look at one of their blocks of code what it does yet. You're not the one who worked it out originally, so having to try to figure that out can sometimes be actually harder than just writing programs yourself. That is going to be what it's going to be like when you go and work at an actual company though. You're going to be reading their code that they already have, assuming that you don't go just work at a startup and they're relying on you to build the platform itself. In most cases in your career, you're going to be working on other people's code. So this is a really important skill set for you to develop. It's basically a form of reverse engineering, and you are going to be running into this absolutely constantly in your career, regardless of where you work. The next subject I want to get into is interview prep. Now, this may seem kind of redundant. You might be thinking, well, here I am doing excellent projects on GitHub. I have a lot of work and experience to show for myself. I'm an excellent programmer. I read all these books. I went to college. And you think you're just going to go jump into interviews and do well. Well, unfortunately, I have some bad news for you. The industry has a real problem with interviews right now, especially when it comes to asking questions that are completely unrelated to the job that you're applying for. You're probably not going to run into any questions about biology. I hope not, at least. But you are going to realize after you do a few interviews that it's its own skill set entirely. It's totally separate from being a good programmer. Even if you're applying for a programming job, the interview may have less to do with actual development than you might think. My point in saying all this is that you should learn to be a good interviewer, especially if you're going to do a lot of interviews and you want to stand out in the crowd. I know that Khan Academy and Udacity and Udemy and Coursera all have their own programs for prepping you on how to do interviews, but I've just found in the ones that I've done that Codecademy's is definitely the best. And that leads me into my next point, which would just be kind of a word of wisdom here. When you are interviewing, most companies will allow you to interview in any language of your choosing. I highly recommend that you choose Python pretty much always. There will be exceptions to that rule, but almost always I recommend Python. And the reason for this is because you are going to be put under stress tests. Python can achieve the most with the least amount of code in the fastest amount of time. When you're put under pressure and you have to read somebody else's code, you want it to be as legible as possible. And in my experience, I have bombed a couple interviews that were in C. It's just hard to read sometimes. It's hard to figure out what's happening. Python is fast and easy to read, and it's designed for that. But it's also concise. And Python is always going to carry you the furthest in the least amount of time. You don't need to specialize in Python or be a master at the language, but you will find that when you're doing interviews, it will help you tremendously. I know this has been a really long video, and it kind of has to be because it's detailed, and even then I'm only barely scratching the surface of everything there's to know about how to learn programming and break into the industry. I do hope that this has been useful, at least in one way or another. Before I end this video, there's one other topic that I want to talk about. This is something that a lot of programmers won't tell you. For some reason, there's this sort of pride associated with programmers getting a job easily. The truth is that no matter how good of a programmer you are going to have to anticipate to apply to thousands of positions. And I don't say that lightly. I mean literally thousands of positions before you get solid interviews and end up getting a job. You may even have to do 100 interviews before you get hired. This is true for everyone in the industry, whether you're the best programmer in the world or you're not good at all. I've seen so many people enter the industry with great expectations. They're talented, they're great programmers, and they end up not being able to get a job for months, and they quit thinking the industry is basically broken, discouraged that they're maybe not very good programmers. Both of those cases are usually not true. The industry has plenty of jobs, and as long as you're working hard and you put your mind to it, you probably are a good enough programmer. Neither of those are usually going to be your issue. The issue is just that the markets are so oversaturated right now that the reality is you're going to have to apply to thousands of positions. Think about it this way. If every position has 1,000 people applying to it, which kind of is true for a lot of tech jobs and openings, you're going to see thousands of people applying to each one. So by that logic, you yourself are going to have to apply to several thousand before you get heard. Not to mention, on top of that, there are tons of fake listings. I can make a whole separate video about why companies are posting fake listings that they're not actually hiring for, but just anticipate it. A lot of people are going to get back to you immediately, literally before they even have time to read your resume, saying that you don't have the skill set that they're looking for, or you don't fit their company culture. All of that is nonsense. They probably didn't even read your resume. In most cases, your resume will never even get read, but that's why we apply to thousands of places. Applying to jobs in this tech market is basically its own full-time job. So just anticipate on taking at least a month every single day, working 40-hour weeks, literally doing 8-hour days, applying nonstop. You just have to expect it, anticipate it, and prepare for it. Do not be discouraged if people keep getting back to you and saying that they're not interested. That doesn't reflect poorly on you as a programmer or as a person. This is just the ridiculous industry that we work in right now. The truth about work today, pretty much internationally, is that anything you want to do, there's going to be a brick wall in your way preventing you from doing it. And those brick walls are actually a good thing. Those brick walls protect industries from becoming too oversaturated with people that aren't knowledgeable and don't actually care. So don't be afraid if you see so many people going into tech. You have to be more willing than them to be the Kool-Aid man, right? To jump through the brick walls and just press on, jumping over all the hurdles that are going to come your way. And that's going to be true in basically any modern industry in the whole world right now. So just expect it, be yourself, and do your best. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope if you're a beginner out there watching this, maybe you got at least something from this video. At least you have sort of a guideline of where to start and begin your journey. It's an exciting journey up ahead, and it's going to be a little bit of a roller coaster for you with the highs and lows of life throughout your career. I wish you the best of luck, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.